Hey, good people, welcome in. Dr. Lund here. Today, what I would like to do is talk about my observations of Darrell Brooks, a 40-year-old man who is currently on trial for the November 2021 attack on a Waukesha Christmas parade, where he had driven his car through the parade path and killed 6 people and injured 60 more. Mr. Brooks has a long record of felonies that date back to 1999, where he was found guilty of slashing another man's face with a knife, and was found guilty of substantial battery intentionally causing bodily harm as a party to a crime. His next charge was in February 2002, where he was found guilty of possession of THC, a second offense. He was also found guilty in January of 2003, resisting and obstructing an officer. And in February of 2010, he was found guilty of strangulation, suffocation, with previous conviction of battery, criminal damage to property. He was also found guilty in March 2011 of resisting or obstructing an officer, and in November of 2011, he was found guilty again of possession of THC. In December of 2011, he was again found guilty of possession of THC as well as bail jumping. In addition, in July of 2020, he was charged with a series of felonies after prosecutors said that he had fired a gun at his nephew in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. After that shooting, he was ordered to have no contact with a number of people, including his mother. However, just a few weeks after that incident, he again was charged with new crimes, and it was his mother who bailed him out. Then, in early November 2021, Brooks was charged with 2 felonies and 3 misdemeanors, including second-degree recklessly endangering safety related to domestic abuse assessments after he ran over his girlfriend in a gas station parking lot, leaving her with a bloody face and tire tracks on her leg. At the time of the Christmas parade attack, Brooks also had active warrants out from Nevada for skipping out of court on sexual crime charges. On the day of the Christmas parade, he had met up with his ex-girlfriend, who he had struck and run over with the car previously, and she reported that they argued while they were in his SUV, and he started driving and was driving with one hand while hitting her in the face with the other hand. The ex-girlfriend was able to get out of the car. However, soon after that incident, it's alleged that Brooks then drove his red SUV through the parade route, killing 6 people, the youngest being an 8-year-old and the oldest being an 81-year-old. In addition, more than 60 other individuals at the parade were hurt. Brooks was arrested that evening, and in June, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, however, changed his plea in September and decided that he wanted to defend himself. After conducting 2 hearings and reviewing psychologist reports indicating that Brooks did have a personality disorder and was disruptive, however, he was intelligent and articulate enough to defend himself, The judge then granted his ability to conduct his own defense. As always, I am not diagnosing anybody, just merely observing some personality characteristics or mental health issues that may or may not be present. Again, not knowing his history and not evaluating him, we can't diagnose him, but we can talk about what we see. Just from my observations of Darrell Brooks, one of the things, aside from all the chaos that he spins, is the fact that he seems to be very grandiose, which basically means he overestimates his knowledge and his importance. This can be part of a personality disorder. It can also be part of a delusional disorder, even a psychotic disorder. But he knows a little bit about perhaps a lot, but doesn't really seem to have the expertise to draw specifics on the things he expounds on. One of the other issues I found was interesting, that he identifies himself as a sovereign or a sovereign citizen, which again is somebody that feels that they are not under the federal or the U.S. law. However, I don't know if he's ever used that in any of his other court cases. It would be interesting if that's something that he had sort of pulled out during other court cases, or if this is a new tactic that he has incorporated to see just how far this will take him. But I think some of the interesting issues to that is because I don't know how often he utilizes this, and so I really have no idea of how ingrained in this movement he actually is. There's a lot of history to the sovereign movement. There are different types of sovereigns. He knows some keywords, but again, I don't get a sense that he knows a lot about the background of if you have somebody who has been maybe a lifelong member in some of the organizations that identify themselves as sovereigns. He doesn't seem to have a depth of knowledge of that. And again, could be part of the grandiosity, part of the manipulation, something that he thinks may do something to help his case. However, to me, there's a lot of grandiosity to him. Again, like I said, he thinks he has a bigger, wider knowledge base. And interestingly, granted, I think the judge is doing everything she can to legally stay within her lane and within boundaries and document everything that she's doing and explaining to him. But also, I think, in this situation, what that does is, I think that also feeds into his grandiosity, is that she's not just throwing him out of the courtroom, but she's covering her legal basis. I believe there's lots of reasons for why she does what she does, although sometimes you can pull your hair out, go, don't start an argument with him because it goes nowhere. But I believe, and again, not being a lawyer, some of these things she has to do to have it documented, of what approaches she took, why she did what she did, to justify that whole process, that whole legal process and the whole court process. Again, to cover herself, cover the bases. Another observation I'm sure you all have made is that this gentleman uses terms in the wrong context. Have you ever had that friend who gets into a conversation and they use the wrong words, thinking that they mean something different in their conversation? and he delivers it with confidence. How many times has he gone on and on about subject matter jurisdiction? That seems to be sort of his go-to argument that again fits with the sovereign issue. But then he doesn't seem to be able to explain it or take it anywhere except just throw out the phrase. Some other things that I've noticed a bit more calculating is that he justifies much of his inappropriate behavior, such as not answering questions, and then later on he'll tell the judge, well, he didn't understand the question, so he didn't say anything. And then that turns into a whole a rush to judgment. I'm telling you I don't understand, and you're not explaining this to me. Even the lack of his organization of his own witnesses. He will blame on, usually it's the judge who he's targeting, will blame on her because he didn't get the right documents, or something wasn't told to him, or the the prosecution got different forms than he got. And it's all, to me, a huge smokescreen that he can engage the judge into the chaos. As much as I believe she tries to stay out of the weeds, I think in her attempt again to legally explain things to him, so she has done her job appropriately, it just creates more of that argumentative loop. And it's a no-win situation. The loop just continues on and continues on until he decides to stop it and then move on to maybe a totally different subject or a totally different term that, again, he most likely is using inappropriately. His arguments that he constantly makes are very concrete in nature. And they're circular. It just becomes a loop. And then the next retort from the judge, he'll focus on a comment or a statement, and then that becomes part of the argument. To me, it's sort of like what kids do, when they're constantly asking why, and you start giving them questions, and you realize it's just going to lead to more questions that get more and more difficult to explain, perhaps. On one level, he is diverting the real issues by his arguments, and on some level, it is effective. From the horrific crime he is charged with, and most of the attention is being put on the dynamics in the court between he and the judge and his behavior. And that, to me, takes away a lot of the seriousness of these people's deaths for basically no reason. My impression at times is that he believes his argument strategy makes him look competent. Like he's perhaps watched shows in the past of attorneys, and this is what the TV attorneys do, but he seems to get a sense of confidence, even though some of these he's not using the terms appropriately and they make no sense and there is no resolution to any of the arguments. And interestingly, in contrast to the chaos, there are times where he has very cogent questions or observations that I think surprised the prosecution at times, the judge, and certainly some of the legal analysts that review this case on a daily basis, is that there have been things that he has come up with that shows something well thought out, appropriately questioned, and that's organized in fashion. Very, very different than what his norm basically shows throughout much of this trial thus far. And so that to me, again, is another interesting piece of he's processing he's processing all information. I don't suspect that there is a thought disorder that prevents him from doing that. But the argumentative and disruption that continue on, I mean, it's almost like a high energy agitation period that you would find maybe with somebody with a bipolar disorder, possibly. And again, can't diagnose him, but I'd be very interested to see what the psychological reports are him regarding his intellect and his mental health diagnoses. Another thing I noticed with him is he has a definite pattern of mood swings. Starting off calm and polite, and most days going into intrusive and argumentative fairly quickly, and then from there, anger, and then behaviors such as not answering questions. He built a fort of boxes in front of him so that the judge couldn't see him when he was sitting in the other courtroom, staring at the judge in a very intimidating manner, insulting the judge, saying things like, "I can't believe you're a judge, and you're trying to be slick." These have a very, very predictable pattern to them. However, at times I've seen him also be charming. He started off one day in court very charmingly with the judge, where they sort of traded conversation, knowing that at some point the niceties were going to end, but he was extremely charming during that time. I guess overall, here are some of my observations. I think many, if not most, of his behaviors are calculated and manipulative. He uses terms and phrases in an interesting way. Things like, "you can't force me," or "I don't waver anything," "I don't understand your questions," "I did what you told me to do," "you're overlooking a lot," "you're making all decisions for me," "you can't rush me to judgment." I think he's bright enough to know those are trigger phrases, that he's probably smart enough to know that his case is, I don't think he's not getting out of this. But he's more forward thinking, I would imagine, at setting up a scenario where there could be an appeal made because of these things that he's saying that gets on the record. And I think that's why the judge is explaining so much to him, so that she gets her legal stuff on the record. I also think when he's in his own life, he sort of takes a strategy of baffle them with BS, especially folks that may not be as intelligent as he is. And that's probably worked for him for his lifetime. I think most, if not all, of his behaviors basically is his demonstration of control, which unfortunately on many levels has been effective. He can stop the show. He has delayed things. He really is being reinforced and given a lot of power, basically through the legal process, unknowingly and unwittingly. I think also him representing himself is really feeding into his grandiosity. I think this is a hallmark of something he will be touting to to inmates for the rest of his life. Because this really does feed into that he believes he has more power and knowledge than he actually does. And what I also think, good people, is that his smoke screens, his diversions, his temper tantrums elicit an anger in us, family members, people in the courtroom, any observers, as he tries to undermine the significance of the lives he took and the people he's injured. And so my sense is that that anger is something I suspect the jury probably feels as well too. Thanks, good people, for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.